The officer thought he had stopped a stranger in the rain, but he had just stopped a man who could move the highest rooms of power with one phone call. The words echoed in the silence that followed, because sometimes the greatest mistake a person can make is believing they already know who is standing in front of them. The rain had been falling over Arlington, Virginia, for nearly an hour, turning the streets into mirrors of silver and gold beneath the glow of streetlights. Cars moved slowly through the evening traffic, their headlights cutting through the mist, while the distant sound of city life continued as if nothing unusual was happening. But near the entrance of a government facility, one quiet encounter was about to reveal a truth nobody expected. General Marcus Elijah Carter stood beside his vehicle, holding a small folder under one arm and looking toward the building ahead. He was dressed simply in a dark jacket, gray slacks, and polished shoes. There was no military uniform, no medals, no group of officers surrounding him. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary man finishing a long day. But there was something about the way he carried himself. Calmness, a discipline, the kind of confidence that did not need attention. Then came the sound of a patrol car approaching. Officer Daniel Whitmore had been driving through the area when he noticed Marcus standing near the restricted entrance. He slowed down, watching carefully through the windshield. His expression changed before he even stepped out of the vehicle. "Evening," Daniel said, walking closer. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Marcus turned calmly. "I'm waiting for someone inside." His voice was respectful, steady, and controlled. "Do you have identification?" Daniel asked. Marcus reached into his wallet and handed over his ID. The officer looked at it briefly, then looked back at Marcus. Something about the situation had already changed in Daniel's mind. Instead of seeing a person, he saw an assumption. Instead of seeing a lifetime of service, he saw only what he expected to see. "You understand this area is not open to everyone," Daniel said. Marcus looked around at the empty sidewalk and then back at him. "I understand. That is why I gave you my identification." The answer was simple, polite, but Daniel was not satisfied. A few people nearby began to notice the conversation. They slowed their steps, quietly observing. Marcus remained still, never raising his voice, never showing anger. He had spent decades learning that patience was often stronger than reaction. But Daniel interpreted that patience differently. He believed silence meant weakness. He believed the man in front of him had no influence, no authority, and no one who would challenge his decisions. What Daniel did not know was that Marcus Carter had spent more than 30 years serving the United States Army. He did not know that behind the quiet expression was a lifetime of leadership, sacrifice, and responsibility. He did not know that the man he was questioning was not someone looking for special treatment. He was someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others. The rain continued to fall. The lights continued to reflect on the pavement. And in that moment, Daniel Whitmore made a decision that would change everything. Because he believed he was dealing with just another person standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had no idea that he had just encountered a man whose name carried weight far beyond that quiet street. A man who did not need to prove his power. A man who only needed to make one call. The most dangerous misunderstanding is not when someone does not know the truth. It is when someone believes they already know it. The rain continued falling over Arlington, Virginia, as the quiet conversation between Marcus Carter and Officer Daniel Whitmore became the center of attention for everyone nearby. The street remained calm, but the atmosphere had changed. People passing by slowed down. A few looked over from their cars. Others glanced toward the entrance of the government facility, sensing the tension between a man who carried himself with quiet dignity and an officer who believed he had complete control of the situation. Daniel held Marcus's identification card in his hand, studying it again. There was nothing unusual about the document itself, nothing that immediately revealed the decades of service behind the name. To Daniel, it was just another piece of identification from someone he had already decided to question. "You said you were expected inside?" Daniel asked. Marcus nodded. "That is correct." "And who exactly are you meeting?" Marcus looked toward the building for a moment before answering. "Someone who knows I am arriving." His response was calm, but Daniel heard something different. He heard confidence, and instead of respecting it, he questioned it. "You seem very certain of yourself," Daniel said. Marcus looked back at him. "I believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect. That includes you and includes me." Those words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding responsibility. Marcus had learned early in his military career that leadership was not about demanding attention. It was about remaining steady when situations became difficult. But Daniel did not see leadership. He saw someone refusing to step aside. He saw someone who did not react the way he expected. And that bothered him. Across the street, an older man watching the exchange quietly shook his head. He noticed something others might have missed. Marcus was not acting like someone trying to win an argument. He was acting like someone who already understood that the truth would eventually speak for itself. Inside Marcus's mind, memories moved quietly. Years of early mornings, long deployments, moments when he had to make decisions that affected hundreds of lives. He remembered the people he had served beside and the promises he made when he first put on the Army uniform. He never forgot that service was not about status. It was about commitment. But standing there without his uniform, without a visible symbol of rank, he experienced something he had encountered many times before. Some people did not see the person first. They saw their own assumptions. Daniel finally returned the identification card. "I am going to need you to wait here while I verify this information," he said. Marcus accepted the card and nodded. Of course. There was no argument, no anger, no attempt to intimidate, just patience. And that patience made Daniel even more confident that he was in control. He turned toward his patrol vehicle to make the call. He had no idea that the information he was about to receive would completely change the way he saw the man standing behind him. Because Marcus Carter was not waiting for someone to rescue him. He was simply allowing the truth to arrive in its own time. And sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones right before everything changes. There are moments in life when people reveal who they truly are, not through their words, but through the choices they make when they believe nobody can challenge them. The rain continued to fall over Arlington, Virginia, as Officer Daniel Whitmore stepped back toward his patrol vehicle, confident that the situation was still under his control. He picked up his radio and began requesting verification, expecting a routine response. To him, this was just another identification check. Another conversation that would end with the person in front of him walking away after realizing who had the authority. But Marcus Carter remained exactly where he was. Standing beneath the soft glow of the streetlights, he watched the rain collect on the pavement and listened to the distant sounds of traffic moving through the city. He was not nervous. He was not frustrated. He simply waited. That was something Daniel could not understand. Most people, when questioned by authority, either became defensive or tried to prove themselves. Marcus did neither. He had spent decades learning that confidence did not come from raising his voice. It came from knowing exactly who he was. Marcus had grown up in a small neighborhood outside Richmond, Virginia, where opportunities were not always easy to find. His parents taught him two lessons that stayed with him forever. Work harder than anyone expects, and never allow someone else to decide your worth. Those lessons followed him throughout his entire life. When he joined the United States Army, he was not searching for recognition. He was searching for purpose. Years became decades. Responsibilities became greater. The young soldier who once questioned whether he belonged became a respected military leader trusted with decisions that affected countless people. But despite everything he achieved, Marcus never forgot the importance of humility. He knew that a uniform could command attention, but character earned respect. That was why he stood quietly now. He did not need Daniel to understand his position. He did not need strangers nearby to know his achievements. The truth did not become more valuable simply because people recognized it. Meanwhile, Daniel continued his verification process, occasionally looking back toward Marcus. Something about the situation bothered him. The man was too calm, too composed. There was no panic, No frustration. No attempt to escape the conversation. Daniel had encountered many people who tried to explain themselves quickly, but Marcus was different. He seemed completely certain that the outcome would take care of itself. A few minutes passed. The rain grew heavier, and the lights from the facility reflected across the wet ground. Then Daniel noticed something unusual. Another officer inside the building had walked toward the entrance and was looking in their direction. The officer seemed to recognize Marcus from a distance. He stopped for a moment, almost frozen by the realization that the person standing outside was not who Daniel believed him to be. But before he could say anything, Daniel continued looking at his notes, unaware that the simple conversation he started was becoming something much bigger. Because the man he thought he was questioning was not waiting for permission to be respected. He had already earned it long before that night began. And soon, everyone around him would understand exactly who had been standing there all along. The greatest test of a person's character often comes when they believe they have all the power in the room. And on that rainy evening in Arlington, Virginia, Officer Daniel Whitmore believed exactly that. He stood beside his patrol vehicle, looking through the information on his device while Marcus Carter waited nearby with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning. The passing seconds seemed to bother Daniel more than they bothered Marcus. The officer expected impatience. He expected frustration. He expected the man in front of him to finally ask for special treatment or explain why he should be treated differently. But Marcus did not. He simply waited. That silence created something Daniel did not expect. A feeling that perhaps this situation was not as simple as he first believed. But instead of reconsidering, Daniel doubled down on his assumptions. "You know, most people make this easier when they cooperate," Daniel said. His tone carried the confidence of someone who believed he was teaching a lesson. Marcus looked at him calmly. "I have cooperated from the beginning." His answer was not defensive. It was simply a statement of fact. A few people nearby continued watching. They noticed the difference between the two men. One was trying to prove authority. The other did not need to prove anything at all. Daniel glanced toward the entrance of the facility. He saw employees moving through the doors, but he did not realize that some of them had started noticing who Marcus was. They recognized the posture. They recognized the quiet confidence. They recognized a person who carried years of leadership without needing to announce it. But Marcus remained just another man standing in the rain. That was always how he preferred it. Throughout his career, Marcus had met people who judged him before knowing his story. He had walked into rooms where people noticed his appearance before they noticed his accomplishments. He had learned that the world could sometimes make quick decisions based on incomplete information. But he also learned something more important. The truth did not need to rush. It arrived when the moment was right. Daniel finally stepped closer. "I am going to need you to answer a few more questions," he said. Marcus nodded. Of course. There was no challenge in his voice. No attempt to embarrass the officer. No desire to turn the situation into a confrontation. Marcus understood something Daniel had forgotten. Respect was not proven by forcing someone to admit they were wrong. Sometimes respect was proven by refusing to become the same kind of person who caused the problem. The rain continued falling. The city continued moving. And for a brief moment, everything remained suspended between assumption and reality. Then the door of the government building opened. A young military officer stepped outside, looking around the area. His eyes quickly found Marcus. His expression changed instantly, not with fear, but with recognition. He walked forward with purpose. Daniel noticed the movement and turned around. The confidence on his face began to fade slightly. Something was changing. Something he could not explain yet. The person he thought needed to prove himself was actually someone others had spent years learning from. And the quiet man standing in the rain was about to reveal a truth that would completely change the meaning of that entire encounter. The moment someone discovers they misunderstood a situation is often the moment when everything they believed begins to fall apart. The rain continued to cover Arlington, Virginia, with a steady rhythm as the young military officer walked toward Marcus Carter. The officer moved with respect, his posture changing the moment he reached the man standing near the entrance. "General Carter," he said with a nod. Those two words changed the atmosphere instantly. Daniel Whitmore stood a few feet away, listening carefully. For the first time that evening, uncertainty appeared on his face. He looked from the young officer to Marcus, trying to understand what was happening. Marcus simply gave a small nod. There was no pride in his expression, no satisfaction. He did not look at Daniel as if he had won something. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life understanding that moments like this were not about proving superiority. They were about revealing reality. "General Carter, Colonel Hayes has been trying to reach you," the officer explained. "She wanted to make sure everything was all right." Marcus glanced briefly toward Daniel before answering. "Everything is fine. We were just having a conversation." That response surprised Daniel. He expected anger. He expected a complaint. He expected Marcus to use his position immediately. But instead, Marcus described the situation with simple honesty. Just a conversation. Daniel looked uncomfortable. The person he had treated like an ordinary stranger was now being addressed with the highest level of respect. The realization began to settle in slowly. This was not a man trying to gain authority. This was a man who already carried it. The young officer stepped back slightly, allowing Marcus and Daniel to continue their conversation. The rain fell between them, creating a quiet moment where neither person needed to raise their voice. "General Carter," Daniel finally said, his tone different from before. "I did not realize who you were." Marcus looked at him calmly. "That was never the important part." Daniel paused. The answer was unexpected. Marcus continued, "A person's value should not depend on their title, their position, or whether someone recognizes their name." Those words stayed in the air. They were not spoken as an accusation. They were spoken as a lesson. Marcus had spent years leading people from different backgrounds, different experiences, and different walks of life. He understood that leadership was not about making others feel small. It was about recognizing the humanity in everyone. Daniel looked away for a moment. He remembered the confidence he had carried earlier, the certainty that he already understood everything. But now he was facing the reality that he had judged someone without knowing the full story. Near the entrance, another figure appeared. Colonel Rebecca Hayes stood under the building lights, watching quietly. She had worked with Marcus for years and knew exactly what kind of person he was. She knew he was not someone who searched for revenge or attention. She knew he believed actions revealed character more clearly than words ever could. Marcus looked toward the building, then back at Daniel. The situation was changing, but the most powerful person in that moment was still the one who remained calm. Because while others focused on rank and authority, Marcus focused on something much deeper: respect. And Daniel was about to learn that the greatest leaders are not defined by how many people know their name. They are defined by how they treat those who do not. The truth about a person is often found in the moments when nobody is watching. Long before the rain fell over Arlington that evening, before the quiet conversation between Marcus Carter and Officer Daniel Whitmore, there was a lifetime of choices that shaped the man standing beneath those streetlights. Marcus had never measured his success by the title attached to his name. To him, a title was temporary. A position could change. Recognition could disappear. But character was something a person carried every day. Years earlier, Marcus Carter was not a general. He was simply a young man trying to find his purpose. Growing up outside Richmond, Virginia, Marcus learned early that respect was not something people gave automatically. It was something earned through actions, patience, and consistency. His parents worked hard to provide for their family, and they taught him that circumstances did not determine destiny. They reminded him that every person had the ability to create a meaningful future if they were willing to serve something greater than themselves. When Marcus joined the United States Army, he did not enter with dreams of fame or power. He entered because he believed service mattered. The early years were not easy. He spent countless mornings preparing before sunrise, learning the value of discipline and teamwork. He discovered that leadership was not about standing above others. It was about standing beside them when challenges appeared. Over time, Marcus earned the trust of those around him. He became known not because he demanded attention, but because people noticed the way he treated others. He listened before speaking. He considered before deciding. He understood that every person under his leadership carried their own story. As the years passed, Marcus accepted greater responsibilities. He became a respected military leader, someone trusted with important decisions and difficult situations. But despite the achievements, he never allowed success to separate him from the lessons of his childhood. He remembered what it felt like to be overlooked. He remembered what it meant to have people judge a person before learning their story. That memory stayed with him. It shaped the way he led. Back in Arlington, standing across from Daniel Whitmore, Marcus understood something important. The officer did not know his history. He did not know the sacrifices behind his name. He did not know the countless people Marcus had helped throughout his career. And Marcus did not blame him for not knowing. What mattered was what happened next. A person's true nature was revealed when they discovered they were wrong. Daniel looked at Marcus differently now. The confidence from earlier had faded, replaced by uncertainty and reflection. Colonel Rebecca Hayes remained nearby, watching silently. She knew Marcus better than almost anyone. She knew he had the ability to end the situation with a single statement. She knew one phone call could bring immediate attention from people across the highest levels of government. But she also knew Marcus. He had never been interested in showing power. He believed the strongest response was often the one controlled by wisdom. The rain continued falling softly. The city lights reflected on the ground. And in that quiet moment, Daniel began to understand that he was not standing across from someone who needed to prove his importance. He was standing across from someone who had spent a lifetime proving it through service, humility, and honor. Sometimes the most powerful moment is not when someone reveals who they are. It is the moment when they choose how to use that truth. The rain continued falling over Arlington, Virginia, as Marcus Carter stood quietly near the entrance of the government facility. The situation had changed completely. Just minutes earlier, Daniel Whitmore believed he was the person controlling the conversation. Now, he stood across from a man whose life represented decades of service, leadership, and dedication. But Marcus did not look at Daniel with anger. He did not look at him with a desire to embarrass him. Instead, he looked at him with the same calm expression he had carried from the beginning. Colonel Rebecca Hayes stepped closer, holding a secure communication device in her hand. Her presence reminded everyone nearby that Marcus was not simply an individual standing outside a building. He was someone connected to a much larger responsibility. Daniel noticed the change around him. The young military officer who first approached Marcus had shown respect immediately. The people entering and leaving the facility had begun recognizing him. The entire atmosphere had shifted, but Marcus remained the same person. "General Carter," Rebecca said quietly, "your office has been notified. They are waiting for your instructions." Marcus nodded. He looked toward Daniel before answering. "There is no need for anything beyond understanding what happened here." Those words surprised Daniel. He expected Marcus to immediately use his influence. He expected a demand, a complaint, or a display of authority. Instead, Marcus chose restraint. That choice carried more weight than any order could have. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. He thought about the confidence he had shown earlier. He thought about how quickly he had formed an opinion without knowing the person in front of him. Marcus noticed the change in his expression. "Officer Whitmore," Marcus said, "everyone makes mistakes. The important question is what they do after they recognize them." The sentence was simple, but it carried the experience of someone who had spent a lifetime leading others. Marcus knew that accountability was necessary. He also knew that growth was possible when people were willing to face the truth. Daniel looked back at him. "General, I understand now that I did not have all the information." Marcus nodded. "None of us ever have all the information. That is why respect matters." The rain began to slow. The sounds of the city became clearer. Cars moved along the streets. People continued with their evening routines. Yet for those standing there, the moment felt different, because something important had been revealed. Not just Marcus's identity, but the difference between having authority and understanding responsibility. Rebecca watched Marcus carefully. She knew this was exactly who he was. A person who could make one call and change the direction of the entire situation, but who chose to use that power with wisdom. She had seen many leaders throughout her career. Some relied on their position, others relied on fear. But Marcus had always believed that true leadership came from character. Daniel looked toward the government building, then back at Marcus. The man he had underestimated was not defined by his rank. He was defined by the way he carried it. And as the last drops of rain fell onto the pavement, Daniel realized something he would remember for the rest of his career. The strongest people are often the ones who never need to prove how powerful they are. The truth does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a simple moment when people finally see the difference between authority and responsibility. The rain had almost stopped over Arlington, Virginia, leaving the streets covered with reflections from the city lights. The conversation between Marcus Carter and Officer Daniel Whitmore had ended, but the consequences of that evening were only beginning. Inside the government facility, the details of what happened were being reviewed. Not because Marcus demanded it, not because he wanted attention, but because every person who carries responsibility must be willing to examine their own actions. Colonel Rebecca Hayes stood near the entrance, speaking with officials while Marcus remained outside for a few more moments. He looked at the quiet street, taking in the ordinary sounds around him. For Marcus, this was not about victory. It was about a lesson that needed to be understood. Daniel stood nearby, still processing everything that had happened. The confidence he carried earlier had been replaced by reflection. He realized that the situation was never about whether Marcus had enough authority to prove his identity. It was about the assumption that someone should have to prove their worth in the first place. As the review continued, more information came forward. The records showed the importance of following proper procedures, treating every person with dignity, and never allowing personal assumptions to influence professional decisions. Daniel listened carefully. He understood that a uniform represented responsibility, not superiority. Marcus eventually walked over to him. "Officer Whitmore," he said, "what happened tonight can become a mistake that defines you, or it can become a lesson that changes you." Daniel looked at him silently. Those words carried more impact than any official statement could have. Because Marcus was not speaking as a general. He was speaking as someone who had spent decades watching people grow, learn, and become better versions of themselves. "I understand," Daniel finally replied. "I should have taken more time before making assumptions." Marcus nodded. That is where improvement begins. Not with excuses, with honesty. The conversation was brief, but it carried a meaning neither man would forget. Marcus did not need an apology in front of a crowd. He did not need recognition. He simply wanted the moment to become something that could prevent future mistakes. Later that evening, Daniel sat quietly in his patrol vehicle before leaving the area. He looked back at the entrance where Marcus had stood only hours earlier. The image stayed with him, not because of the general's title, not because of the attention surrounding him, but because of the patience he showed when he had every reason to respond differently. Across the city, Marcus returned to his responsibilities, carrying the same calm determination he had always carried. He knew that moments like this were not only about one person. They reflected something larger. Every interaction mattered. Every decision mattered. Every person deserved to be seen beyond the assumptions placed upon them. And as the final drops of rain disappeared from the pavement, one truth remained clear. Real power is not measured by how quickly someone can command others. It is measured by how wisely they choose to use that power when they have every opportunity to do otherwise. The most important moments in life are not always the ones that happen in front of a crowd. Sometimes they are the quiet moments afterward, when people have the chance to think about what they learned and who they want to become. Several days had passed since the rainy evening in Arlington, Virginia, but the memory of that night remained with everyone involved. For Marcus Carter, life continued as it always had. Meetings, responsibilities, and decisions filled his schedule. His position required focus, but his approach never changed. He continued listening. He continued leading. He continued believing that every person deserved respect before they ever had to prove anything. For Daniel Whitmore, however, that evening became a turning point. He returned to his daily duties with a different perspective. The encounter forced him to reflect on how quickly assumptions could shape decisions and how important it was to see people as individuals rather than simple impressions. He thought about Marcus standing calmly in the rain, never raising his voice, never using his position to embarrass anyone. That image stayed with him because it revealed something Daniel had not expected. True confidence did not need to demand attention. True leadership did not need to make others feel small. Meanwhile, Marcus continued visiting communities and speaking with younger leaders about responsibility and service. He often shared a simple message. A person's title might open a door, but character determines what happens after that door opens. He knew that many people focused on achievements, awards, and positions, but he believed the most important measure of success was how someone treated others when they had nothing to gain from being kind. One afternoon, Marcus received a message from Daniel. It was not a long message. It did not contain dramatic words. It was simply a sincere acknowledgement of what happened and a promise to carry the lesson forward. Marcus read the message quietly and smiled. He knew growth rarely happened in a single moment. It happened through reflection, honesty, and the willingness to change. Years of military leadership had taught him that the strongest teams were built when people accepted responsibility and learned from their experiences. The story of that rainy night was never remembered because a general was recognized. It was remembered because a simple encounter revealed something deeper about humanity. One person had a badge. Another person had a lifetime of service. But both had the opportunity to choose what came next. Marcus chose patience. Daniel chose reflection. And from that moment, the lesson became bigger than either man. Respect should never depend on someone's appearance, position, or reputation. It should begin with recognizing the person standing in front of you. Because the world does not always reveal the importance of a person immediately. Sometimes the quietest individual in the room carries the greatest story. And sometimes the person others underestimate is the very person who reminds everyone what dignity, responsibility, and true leadership look like.